Events and Partnerships Manager at Workbar. It's our pleasure to welcome Alec Harrison and Mark Stenquist of Visual Boston. They were presenting to you today on simple and affordable ways to optimize your website. To start, just a little bit about them and the company. Alec and Mark recently co-founded Visual Boston, a small design and development studio that aims to help companies get ROI from quality design with a collaborative, iterative, and personalized approach. Mark is a software engineer and designer with over 10 years of experience helping teams build and maintain beautiful website and mobile applications. Alec, also a Downtown Workbar member, is a UX and UI design professional, also with over 10 years of experience leading iOS, Android, and web-based product design from concept to launch. They're both passionate about discovering the value of existing people within a company to help make better informed decisions for future team growth, as well as mentoring young developers to help them learn valuable new skills. We're so happy to have them. Thank you guys for being with us. Just a few notes for our guests before we turn it over. If you're new to the Zoom webinars, it'll be best to have your screen in presenter mode. They are going to be presenting a slideshow presentation today, so just follow along with that. Please type in any questions as you go. I'll be monitoring that either in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll either go through them throughout the presentation or we'll get to them at the end, but we're all here for the questions, so please ask away. And so with that, we'll turn to Alec and Mark. Please start by telling us a little bit more about you guys and how you guys got here with Visual Boston.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the intro, Christy. Thanks everyone for joining. I recognize some of your names. Some of them I'd love to get to know you further. So Mark and I have known each other for, I'd say, 5 years now. And we were doing startups. We've worked with each other. We've hired each other at various companies. And it's always been love at first sight, I'd say, Mark. And
I definitely agree.
we decided during COVID, we were both contractors and consultants doing our own thing. During COVID, we realized, okay, now's the time to just take the plunge and start working together and bring this vision to life. So we started by, going into our networks and helping each other out that way. But we also saw a huge need in just product design and user-centric design. So what I mean by that is a lot of agencies will hand you something beautiful and then they'll ship it away. And in the real world, you have to maintain and nurture this thing that you're kind of bringing into the wild, whether it's a web app, a native app, or a website. And Mark and I just, as you mentioned, Chelsea, so passionate about helping people that we decided, okay, well, let's at least start with webinars, start writing content and giving away content to just help anyone. And if there's anyone on here that knows me from Workbar personally, I just like to talk and help people as much as I can. And Mark's very similar.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. So Mark, I think you had the presentation, if you want to pull it up.
I can actually share my screen if that's easier.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No problem. So let me know if you guys can see that.
Yes, we can see that. So why don't you guys just take it away?
Yeah, no problem. So one of the things we were thinking about is, okay, everyone should probably have a website by now, whether you're using Squarespace, whether you're using WordPress or you've customized your own. There's a reason for you to have a website, and usually it's to convert someone to do something, to download something, to educate them. And there's a lot of best practices that Mark and I have thought about that we can kind of help you with, whether you already have it in place as a nice gut check, or just want to take some notes as something you might want to try. So we did some basic intros, so I'm going to skip that for now. So we focused on a few points that are more from a UX UI lens. So what's better for the user and their experience, with a layer on top of it, which Mark comes in, whereas Mark's a great engineer and front-end engineer. So he knows, the mechanics of it and how to implement these things. So the first big thing is navigation. So when you first come to a website, as a user, you should be thinking, what can I do here? Where can I go? What can't I do here? And it should be easy for the user to navigate through your content as if you were having a conversation with them one-on-one in real person. So there's a lot of best practices you can do here and some things that you can try to avoid. A good example is having a clear call to action, even on your navigation. So sometimes a button, your main call to action, might be floating or somewhere else. So here in Miro version, they put play video. But what they really want you to do is buy the product. So they're very explicit to say, buy this product. That means it costs money. You already know that. You might not be aware of what this thing is, but at least you know that it's a purchase. And then typically what people do is they use this called a hamburger. So it's 3 lines and it really just means menu or there's something hidden there. But what I like about Miro is they pull out the kind of main links that they want you to go look at. And this is usually the kind of questions you have when you're first looking at a product. In their example, it's an e-commerce. So what we're trying to display here is if you can get your navigation outside of the hidden areas, it would definitely be your benefit to do so. And what I mean by that is desktop, we have a lot of real estate to kind of put our navigation out there. And these are usually supposed to be how you would walk someone through your story to eventually get them to buy the product. But on mobile, we only have so much space, as you all know, and usually people hide it here, but it would be great to kind of spill it out if you can. So a good example is some products that we know, Slack, they'll use something that comes out of the box, usually out of, these build your own kind of websites. But honestly, it doesn't do a lot of justice for an end user because they don't really know what lives beyond that. So for these hamburgers, one thing you could do is just try adding the word menu next to it or replacing the whole hamburger icon altogether with an actual word menu. And if you have analytics on your website, these are great little tweaks to try to see how your optimization is working for you. So the other thing with menus is there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. So some of you, I'd imagine, have web apps. So they're kind of a mix between a website and an application. And as you all know, we're very familiar with the apps that we get from our phones, and we try to emulate that experience through the browser. So Airbnb is a great example of if you go to their website on your mobile phone through the browser, they'll try to emulate what you see through the App Store. Now, the problem with this is it's great for UX to kind of feel like it's an app, but keep in mind when you're going through the browser, you still have those elements of the browser that are kind of go overlay on top of whatever your website has. So for this example, it was a great attempt to feel like a native app, but they really needed to put a little bit more effort into it to kind of push the navigation up. I'd also suggest not going this route because you have devices such as Android and different browsers that are going to have different icons. So you're now going to have competing menus and navigations next to each other. So just to keep in mind, whatever that navigation is, try to make it clear for the end users. Another thing real quick on navigation is text is always going to be the best one you can use. If you want to use icons, that's great, but I'd be really careful relying just on icons. They're very hard for people to understand unless it's something like a hexagon for a stop sign. The other thing in SEO and accessibility, you're going to want to kind of play with that text to make it very clear what that link does for people.
All right, awesome. Everyone, thanks for joining and hearing us out here. I'm going to talk a little bit about image optimization. Having started in design and moved into engineering early in my career, this is something that allows me to kind of bridge that gap because I love websites that are fast. I love websites that look great on all devices. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, mind going next, or I don't mind going next slide. Thanks. So yeah, basically, why optimize your website images? The main goal here really is to reduce the overall size of the document. If you think of your whole website and all the assets that are on it, reducing the size of some of your larger images by 50% or more can really make a big difference. Given that the page is now usable in less time. Sometimes I've found issues where large images that take a long time to load can cause some awkward shifting in the user interface. What I mean by that is if you had a large image on the top of your website on mobile and maybe you had a headline, some paragraph text below, if you have a slow connection, maybe you're driving in the car and you're browsing someone's site, you might see that text be towards the top of the page, and then once the image finally loads, it's pushed down. It's kind of a jarring, I call it janky looking experience that you can definitely avoid and help optimize. Also, you can improve your SEO ranking by having images that are more optimized as well, which everyone can really value from that.
Hi, Mark, before we move on,
Sure.
someone wants to ask, just because we're on the slide, what exactly do you mean by reducing overall size of the document? Can you just go into
So
that a little bit more?
yes, so document is really like your web page, your entire website. So when the size is more like the size in kilobytes or megabytes, say, of your entire page. When you load a site for the first time, your site might be, 1 to 1.5 megabytes. Of maybe 20–30% of that might be images. So if you can reduce the overall size, the file size on disk, you speed up the time it takes your page to load. The
Okay.
document is really the HTML document. It's everything JavaScript, CSS, HTML that are on your web page. I hope that
Awesome.
helps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, next slide would be great. So yeah, how large should my images be? And again, when I say large, I mean in file size, but that obviously the physical size in pixels obviously affects the overall size too. So yeah, how large should they be? Really, the answer is it depends on the size you plan to display them. So if you wanted to put a small avatar, a small picture of your face next to your name, maybe your title on your website, that image does not need to be 500 by 500 pixels. It's way too big. It really needs to be like, my general rule of thumb is all images under 200 kilobytes if possible. That includes like backgrounds, but for smaller images like an avatar, you're talking like 48 by 48 pixels. That really should only be 50 kilobytes maximum or less. So the smaller the better is the ultimate goal. So yeah, I mean, really, there's a few important things to remember here is like choosing the right image for the job. This is like my favorite meme of this little kid with his thumbs up. But JPEGs are really the image that you most are probably familiar with. They can be compressed and optimized. They're great for pretty much the majority of all use cases. Where other files come in full, like PNGs, are for transparency. If you needed to have some image of yourself cut out overlapping something, like a PNG can really help there. I try to avoid them where possible because their file size is large. Pardon me. And lastly, SVG is something I love. They're scalable vector graphic. Basically, it's an image that is calculated like mathematically, so as it scales up, it's always crisp. So if you can get your logo or brand logos maybe that you worked with in an SVG format on your website, they always look crisp no matter what size they're scaled to. And you can do a lot of other neat tricks with them. But yeah, SVG and JPEG are primarily the ones I try to focus on. And yeah, Alf, do you mind going to the next slide for me? So one thing I always do on every website I've worked on, especially in the last several years as it became a little bit more popular, is really trying to make these images crisp. So exporting them at multiple pixel densities. So your iPhone example, your latest iPhone, this one here I have, that screen can display graphics that are 1.5 times to 2 times or more pixel density. And what that means is if you were to load a 1x or like a standard size image on a phone or a Retina screen, it would look a little bit blurry. And what you can do to mitigate that is start exporting all your images you use on your website at 2x as well. So basically, if something is 500 by 500 pixels, also export one that's 1,000 by 1,000. And what you can do is, if you have a developer that you worked with, happy to answer questions around this, is one simple attribute that you can add to your image tags that basically you give it the path for the image that you've exported at 2x, and you put next to it 2x. That means when the resolution of this display can handle it, load this bigger image. So what will happen is if you move from one screen to another screen that's a higher resolution, the images are like so much clearer. And it really makes a big difference as far as like imagery and making things, especially for someone with bad eyes like myself, it really, really helps. So I definitely recommend making your site as crisp as you can using techniques like source set. You can do some of these processes manually. Photoshop is, everyone's familiar with Photoshop. You can save your images for web. And by adjusting I still honestly do this approach more than any other, is adjust the quality of your image and then the overall size. If you need a background image, you really don't need the image to be more than like 1280, 800 or so. Like, I think like laptop dimensions, and the quality can usually be lowered well beyond 100. And in Photoshop, you'll notice that as you adjust those settings, the size of the image that it will be outputted will be smaller or larger. So yeah, Photoshop is a great tool. It's a manual. I use it all the time, but there's definitely some others, including the next slide here. We have Tiny JPEG, Tiny PNG. This is an online tool I've seen and used. Not a ton, but I know that it works. But you basically upload or drag and drop an image onto here, and it will automatically run some compressions on the image, tell you how much you saved, and then the total amount of the outputted image. So this one went from 193 kilobytes to 95 kilobytes. And that's huge, especially if you have hundreds of images on your site. Next is Image Optim. It's a small app for the Mac, which is great. Very simple, not as fancy without the panda there, but does a very similar thing. Drags images in, runs compression on them, and outputs them at much smaller sizes. I've seen a lot of websites that have 1.5, 2, 3, 4 megabyte photos on them, and to no fault of the person developing them, they didn't know. If you were to take photos from your iPhone or Android, usually those dimensions are huge. So it's always important, if you do take your own photography and put on your site, that you really look at what size that image is. Here's an example in the file system. 2 images I grabbed, or actually 1 image I grabbed off of Unsplash, and then ran it through Image Optim, I believe, and I was able to save that much kilobytes. And that's pretty big. And I think that might be it. Yeah, that's it for image optimization. A lot of stuff you can do there. And again, SEO, I think, is a huge factor. If you can get the image size down, your SEO rankings can be improved. So yeah, I'll let Alec take it away with CTAs.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So in the beginning, I was talking about call to actions. The whole purpose of a website, we want the user to digest content and then take action. So there's a lot of different ways you can actually put your CTAs scattered throughout your website. One is, fixing it at the top. And instead of saying like click now or buy now, what Disney Plus does here, which I think they did a great job, is try to get some context around it. So what am I getting when I click this thing? You never want your end user to try and guess what's going to be on the other side of this thing. So the more clear you can be, the better. Even if you're using web-based website, for instance, in the browser, you can still do things that we've seen in applications, like floating a button. So when I'm scrolling down this page, this CTA here is always available. And depending on your user types, I would probably suggest either or, as long as that CTA is always available. As you know, everyone's got usually one thumb, one eye on their device, or they're going through multiple devices. So you want to make sure that that CTA is always available, but it's also consistent with the device type. So if it's a web browser that you click on, then it's okay to have it this size. If you're scrolling through your phone, then you want to make sure that no matter where I touch it with my thumb or my finger, I can reach it. Same goes with placing CTAs. So usually you have a hierarchy of CTAs. So you have like a primary, a secondary, and even like a third one, which might be a link or an outline button. For UI today that we've all seen, usually a primary is going to be something more vibrant or filled in or has some drop shadow. A secondary might be an outline. So when you're kind of thinking about how you want to lay out your content in your website, there's going to be moments where users are trying to digest that content, but you want to funnel them out to more content related to that, or you want to put them in a flow that kind of softly gets them eventually to your primary call to action. So a good example here, I believe this is Mint, is they say sign up here. They say sign up free because I think they just have a little bit more room, but this is a little softer than just kind of trying to get you to convert. Now, some of the best CTAs I've seen, they're actually kind of written out a little bit like an action. So I've seen a lot of them use verbs or anything like that. And then something to keep in mind is your case sensitivity. So right now, this is all lowercase, this is uppercase. If you can start getting more into those details, the more refined and professional your website will look and feel, the more that you'll gain trust with those users. So this kind of goes back to the context and the button size that I was talking about earlier. But right now for Disney Plus, I might have, a really large phone and my thumb can't really hit the edges. It's great to be in the middle. But what Mixed Panel does is they kind of just make it full width. So they're saying, hey, it doesn't matter if you're running on the go to work or anything like that. As long as you hit this button, we're going to take you to that page. So I definitely suggest, most of the website editors today will do this out of box, but just something to focus on is just a small thing about the touch targets, we call them. So that's just the area that when I click on this thing, it takes me to that direction. So sometimes when you see an icon, for instance, over on the right-hand side and maybe a link on the left-hand side, if you want the link and the icon to take you to that page, you should make sure that whole area has a touch target so it can be clicked and go to there tapped, not just the icon. So then content amount, it's hard to put all our thoughts in these websites. This is why I really appreciate all the hard work a copywriter can do or anyone that's great at writing. I'm terrible at writing, so I appreciate it. But as you've noticed, our attention spans are getting smaller and smaller. So I believe the attention span now is like 6 to 8 seconds of an average human. So when you're looking at a website or you're going on a phone or an iPad, we're very distracted by ads, social media, different device types. So the biggest thing that's going to work for you is your actual content. That's your headlines, and that's your kind of supporting text here, and also the text written in the call to action. Now, a lot of companies try to get very creative and fun with these headlines. I've seen the best optimized versions are really just straightforward. Talk to me like we're talking, face to face, having coffee, and let me know what you're trying to communicate from this section. Typically, a lot of these websites now that are being visited are on phone. So you have to be very careful with your character count. Normally for like a blog post, it's okay because I'm expecting a lot of content. But when I'm on a marketing website, I really just want to know that quick hit, that headline, and then I'll maybe read the supporting text. But if you watch your end users or anyone go on your site, most of the time they're just scrolling up and down, and sometimes they'll find a little section that they're interested in, but most of the time they're just skimming to kind of get the content that they need. So I would strongly suggest focusing on just your headlines. And then if you feel like you need additional content, start working on a subheader or a paragraph. If you need more content than this, there's some great patterns to utilize when you're on these smaller screens. So keep in mind that we can now move left to right on these devices. We can layer things now on these devices. So think about some patterns that you used before. So swiping left to right is a great example. So this is Airbnb. If you go to their website, you kind of swipe left and right through their, I would say, value props. And then for Peloton here, this is kind of like case studies. If you think of it that way, you can also swipe left to right through these. Now, these are a lot better than traditionally we had expand and collapse content sections. The reason why I don't suggest those is because ideally you don't have a lot of movement for end users. So if you've ever used a website and something animates on you, it's hard to readjust again. So expand, collapse are very difficult to make sure that the user knows exactly where they are at all times. So swipe left to right, luckily now is a lot easier to implement, and it also works great for both touch and browser. And then, so Mark and I realized we've got a lot of things to share and we could focus on a ton, but we think the most value is this time here. And I'm sure you all have your own website, your own web app, or mobile app. And we just really want to make sure that we help provide the most value. What we like about a webinar is we have no clue if it's 2 people or 100 people, and it doesn't matter. We want to provide value during this time. So I really encourage anyone to ask any kind of UX, UI related and front end related question on maybe your website. And if you think your website's great, that's fine. We can help you with like analytic tool recommendations, anything like that. But I really encourage you to, pretend we're grabbing coffee on this call and ask some questions for us. So that being said, are there any brave people out there asking a question?
Well, I'll get started because I had a few. My background is in marketing, so I just had a few that I popped up along the way that I think might be helpful. And again, some people on this might know this and some people might not, but we don't know what level we're dealing with here. So I guess first and foremost, when clients are speaking to designers or speaking to web developers like you guys, what are some tips that we should know as the client that is easily relatable to you guys so you can get more quickly what we're looking for and vice versa? I think one of the hardest things is that language barrier, if you will, between the two sides. Just because I know you mentioned you guys use short quips that even throughout this, I was, what is he saying? So what are some things that make it easier so that the call is more efficient and so that we get to the same product quicker?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So I would say, from my perspective, it's understanding why do you want to build this website, web app, or mobile app in the first place? And to have that Northern Star and be aligned on your business goal is very crucial, because we've had a lot of clients come to us say, I need an iOS app, something that you download from the App Store. After a quick hour whiteboard session, we'll say, actually, what we believe you need is a responsive web app, and here's why. On top of a business goal and need, it's also helpful to understand, where are you within your business? Are you a startup that's using this as a proof of concept, or are you using it to raise your next round of funding? Or, whatever that business goal is, the more transparent you can be with Mark and I, the better we would be able to kind of point you in the right direction. Another crucial thing is, from a marketing standpoint, is target audience. Who exactly is this for? And more importantly, why? What are their needs and goals? It doesn't matter what we like or need. It's really what the end user needs. So you're trying to use a website basically as a bridge between what you're trying to communicate as a service or a product to your target audience. Just like Facebook launched, you can't target everybody all at once. It's just not physically possible. You're probably better off kind of focusing and narrowing on a niche, and then kind of catering your content around different segments of people that come in there. So for Mark and I, it's also helpful to understand budget and what is the main purpose of the website. Is your business solely going to be built from a website, such as an e-commerce? And a great example is Mark and I can say, okay, well, based on your needs that you're telling us, something as simple as Shopify is great, or something as simple as WordPress is great. If all of a sudden you have a unique business model and we can't use out of the box kind of easy things to use, then we'll say it right away. Well, you might need customization. And unfortunately, customization costs a lot of time and money. So what we try to do is do a lot of exploratory sessions with clients before we even talk about, scope of work, because we want to understand like requirements that are going to really provide the most return on investment. So for us, it's a lot of legwork, but it's also making sure, are we the right pair? And we have a great intake form that Mark and I have been working on, like I said, for the past 10 years, refining these kind of questions and exercises that we kind of help people with. I'm more than happy to kind of put something together for Workbar with Mark and share it with people on this call if they find that useful.
I think that would be useful. I just know, even speaking to a graphic designer, sometimes it's, you don't know, and you guys launched into a lot of pixels and JPEGs and all of this. And I think that, one of the questions that we had is, can you still have a visually stimulating site with large images and low kilobytes? But I think sometimes people don't even know the basics of what that language means. So I think, well, first, if you could explain that a little bit more, that would be great. But also, just if you say reducing a JPEG or reducing a PNG, I think that what are some things that we need to know when we're talking to you to be like, how do I correlate this from the mobile website to the desktop website, I think is the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, do you want to kind of talk through this one?
Yeah, so I mean, some people will come to me and say, "This is the photo I want. This is a link to a stock photo, maybe on like iStock Photo or any of those online places where you can buy the rights to use images." Usually, those images come in multiple size resolutions. If we were to implement the approach I suggested, where you made the image look really crisp on like the fancier screens, your MacBook Pro, your iPhone, you want to start with a larger image because you can't really make a smaller image bigger without losing some of the quality. So a lot of people will come to me with just an image saying like, this is the one I want to use, and I'll just implement it. As far as other questions around that, about it being visually stimulating with large image and low kilobytes, it's certainly doable. Usually I can get away with the lowest quality image when it's in the background. Maybe I put a semi-transparent overlay on top of it just to give it some texture in the background. I don't need to see every tree in like in the scape photo. I can just have it kind of blurred in the background, and that's a great instance where you don't need the high resolution photo. You just need it for texture, and you're able to reduce the quality of the photo 10, 15 times because it's used in a way that doesn't take a lot of attention from the user.
So Mark, if you don't mind letting me
Sure.
piggyback off that. So Chelsea, to your question, if you had a picture of a forest, for instance, and you really wanted a forest in your background, you would kind of talk to Mark and I used to be a graphic designer, to say, the reason why I want a forest is because I'm trying to communicate this. And talking to us, if you're more flexible from a creative standpoint to say, I'm okay with different trees, different forests, this is the feeling that I want to evoke, and this is why, then someone like Mark and I can kind of play with some options to, one, make sure, like Mark said, it's loading fast, it's optimized, and that we under the hood slice it out properly. But more importantly, it gets you what you need. And then just kind of trust the designer and the developer that they're the expertise that's going to make it load fast. As long as I'm proud of my work and I communicate what I needed to, we're going to make sure we do that anyways. I think building that bridge is important, and just trusting, creativity takes time. So it's not always like the first time. That's part of the process. So if you can give us more time, we can stay within the budget. That's not the problem. Time being rushed is when you have issues of Mark and I and other agencies being like, well, now we're going to have to increase the price to hit that demand. And that's not fun for anyone, because the creative process actually does take a little time. It's like molding clay a little bit.
Right. Of course. Thank you for both of you for explaining that. And then I think also, because we've mentioned ROI a lot on this call, on this webinar, but you guys did mention framework and flow. So I think it would be important for our viewers if you guys could touch on what backend analytics or, framework should they be looking at in case they need to change things up. What should they be looking at that in order to further optimize their website and make sure that they're getting the clientele that they'd like. So, if you notice that people are looking at your images page more so than your actual menu page, if you're a restaurant, what are some things that we should be looking for, and then talking to our developers about?
Sure. I can talk real quick about the UX UI kind of front, and I'll let Mark kind of talk about the more technical system architecture. So from my end, we're just guessing, right? Until we understand what people are really doing. And a lot of times when you ask someone what they think about your website, most of the time they won't tell you because they don't know themselves until they play with it. Right. So some analytic tools that we like and actually use ourselves are Full Story. So fullstory.com is a great one. What's nice about that analytics tool is they are focused on being HIPAA compliant and taking marketers and engineers out of it if you don't need them to be. So what I mean by that is they have a search tool where you can add these little combos of, I want to see people that clicked on this button that came from this page and only went to this page. You don't need a developer to set this up traditionally like you used to in Google Analytics. It is a little expensive for sure, They do take screencasts, so you have to be careful and make sure that you're only exposing data that you want your team to be able to use, and you have to communicate. I would suggest communicating to your end users and your privacy policy that, hey, we're using full story, this is what it is, things like that. Another one that's great is Hotjar. So Hotjar takes what they call confetti and scrollable thermal scans. So they'll show you exactly how far people are getting on a page. We've all seen those very long landing pages, especially when you go on mobile. So you can see just how far people's attention spans are on one page and where they go. That also has screencasts. All of these are affordable at a certain point. So you might get like 2,000 people, unique sessions a month, and that's free. If you are driving a ton of traffic to your website, of course, that's not going to cut it. Then a few others that you could do are, I believe, Google Optimize. So if you need to A/B test things on your website, for instance, you just want to test a new headline and maybe a new image background and see how that works. A person versus an illustration, for instance. That's a great one. The challenge with those is you probably need someone a little bit more technical who knows how to set those up. But again, those companies make it really easy if you want to sit there and YouTube it or take their training curriculum. But I think the end goal is you don't want to collect too much data, because then you're just collecting data and you're not really sure what to use with it. What you want to do is think about the user flows and what you want this person to do on your website, and you're going to track that. So e-commerce are very easy. You like, I want to show them product. I want them to buy it now, or I want them to look more details on it and then buy it. Then you create marketing campaigns to nurture it. We've all been hit with advertisements and emails that kind of try and get you back in there. Marketing your websites are a little trickier. What you're going to want to know is think about your user types. And usually you have a user type that's ready to go. They're excited. Maybe you talk to them and they just want to make sure you're credible, that you're trustworthy, and before they make the sale. Then you're going to have some different type of users that are just, they need a little bit more handholding. They're not ready to commit yet. Those are the people that you're going to want to create different flows to follow them. And you might be giving them something for free. That's where white papers came in. So you've seen a lot of SaaS or B2B websites, they'll usually give free content to kind of nurture those relationships before they try and make the sale. So I think first map out who's this user, what I want them to do, and then support your analytics tracking A through Z to support those user flows so you can kind of watch them.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that was very, very helpful. And I think, was Mark going to add anything to that, or?
I think Alec covered it pretty well. I think one thing I will add is that I get a lot of people coming to me with a million great ideas and they want to do all of them at once. But biggest bit of advice there is that, you know, sometimes it's easier to tackle one small portion, a third of what you want to do, get it out there in the wild, again, see what happens, see if people use it or like it before you spend all the money on the full end-to-end thing. So if you can piece out work or initiatives you have into small, like sprints, we might want to call them, in the end, we both feel like that's the way to go. It's way less planning work, less risk involved, and you can get stuff out in people's hands, which really gives you the feedback you need to know whether it was the right decision. So it's kind of one of my big takeaways. But other than that, no, I think Al covered it pretty well.
Yes, I agree. Thank you both. Well, it doesn't look like anybody else has any other questions, but just in case there was any last minute ones, I guess biggest takeaways from what you guys have presented today, please let us know. What are the top three?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say the top three is make sure your call to actions make a lot of sense and they're trying to drive conversion. So they're always accessible and navigation is always accessible and clear to users. Then I'll let Mark take it home.
And the one section I really covered obviously was the image optimization, but you know, if you have a developer, talk to them and say, hey, I heard that it might be nice to think about optimizing our images, and they should be able to go in the browser and figure out if they have any images that are way too big. And if you just pluck off one or two of those, it can make a huge difference for someone on a mobile phone. And, you know, hopefully just makes your website that much more pleasant to use.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I know that this was so helpful for everyone. Can't wait to get it up, and we will be sending out a survey after this. I will include the information for both Alec and Mark and how you can get in touch with them, and also just any resources that they want to provide and the links to their website. So please look out for that email. This is also going to be put in our blog as of next week, so it'll be easily sent out and it's on demand for anybody that wants to view it later. So again, Alec and Mark, Visual Boston is a great thing that you guys are doing. Please reach out to them if you have any questions, and I will get that information out to you shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate it. I know it's 1 o'clock on a Thursday, so I'm sure we're all going to grab coffee soon.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
All right. Have a good one, guys. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks.